In 1904, British Admiral John Fisher declared that there are 5 keys to the world: the Dover Strait, the narrowest part of La Manche, the Gibraltar Strait, the Suez Canal, Cape of Good Hope, and the Malacca Strait. "And we have all these keys," said the Admiral. "We, that is, the British Empire." Running ahead, one could say that the loss of control over the Suez Canal was one of the decisive factors in the fall of the British Empire. Although Admiral Fisher was not a distinguished field commander, he was a good naval theorist. By the way, his efforts to reform the fleet led to the replacement of wooden sailing ships with cruisers, submarines, and the first aircraft carriers with steel hulls. Fisher spoke from an Anglo-centric perspective, but it was understandable and not devoid of sense. Control over key choke points is equated to control over national strategic interests. But centuries later, with the development of military technologies, as well as the interdependence of the global economy, can such a statement be made today? Let's find out which places on the world map have historically been the most important, and which are important now. The Bosporus Strait, Istanbul, formerly Constantinople, and even earlier Byzantium, and in Slavic Tsargrad. In 3 empires, Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman, this city was the capital. But, according to historians, Istanbul was never a center of world attraction, like Rome, Venice, Amsterdam, London, and New York. However, now every 5th Turk lives in Istanbul. The city's population is estimated at about 16.5 million people. Moreover, the city contributes 30% of all Turkey's revenues, and on this map, the countries with economies smaller than Istanbul's are highlighted in blue and those larger in red. Istanbul has gained its power and influence thanks to its strategic location. The city is located on the shores of the Bosporus Strait, which is a narrow waterway separating Europe and Asia. This corridor represents the only route that can be used by Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, Georgia, and Russia to access the Mediterranean Sea and further to the ocean. Therefore, it is clear that the Bosphorus has significant importance for all these countries, especially for Russia, which is forced to send almost all its oil through the port in the Black Sea, as this port does not freeze all year round. The Danube, the second longest river in Europe, also flows into the Black Sea. This river passes through thousands of kilometers, washing such large European cities as Vienna, Bratislava, Budapest, and Belgrade. Thanks to the Danube Canal, it has a connection with the Rhine River and the port of Rotterdam, which is the largest trading hub in Europe. This circumstance always makes Istanbul a strategically important place on the planet. However, Turkey does not derive benefit from the Bosporus Strait. Moreover, Turkey is limited in which military ships it is allowed to let pass through the Bosporus, especially when it comes to the ships of NATO allies. To solve this problem, Turkey is developing a plan to turn Istanbul into an island, and the reason is connected with the events of 1923, after the First World War and the Turkish War of Independence. In accordance with the Lausanne Treaty, Turkey is prohibited from having military ships in the Bosporus Strait. The country is also obliged to ensure free passage for civilian and commercial vessels of third countries in unlimited quantities. Turkey had to accept these conditions and guarantee the integrity of its country to avoid further interference from Western states. As the economy developed, the Turks sought to change the conditions of the Lausanne Treaty. In 1936, the Montreux Convention was signed, which gave Turkey the ability to have a naval fleet in the Bosporus Strait and regulate the passage of military ships of third countries. All this became the basis for a strange geopolitical situation, where the Black Sea aquatory was at the intersection of the interests of Bulgaria, Romania, Ukraine, Georgia, and Russia. And both civilian and commercial ships, according to the convention, could freely use the strait. But Turkey was prohibited from charging any fee for this. At that time, this deal was beneficial for Turkey, as thanks to it, it was able to remain neutral during the Second World War. This convention also benefited the Soviet Union, as it prevented the entry of military ships from the Axis into the Black Sea throughout the Second World War. However, after the end of the war, many disputes arose regarding this agreement. Immediately after the end of the war, the Soviet Union demanded joint control over the Bosporus with Turkey, and the constant presence of Soviet armed forces in this region. Turkey rejected these demands. However, the Soviet Union found a loophole in the convention. It was established that no more than 9 foreign warships can pass through the Bosporus at the same time, and their total displacement should not exceed 15,000 tons. As a result, the Soviet Union simply placed 1 cruiser in the Bosporus with a displacement of 11,000 tons, effectively prohibiting other countries, with the exception of Turkey, from using the Bosporus for military purposes. In response to pressure from the Soviet Union, Turkey joined NATO in 1952, which displeased Soviet authorities, as control over the strait fell into the hands of a Cold War adversary. But such circumstances became a stick at both ends. Under the old convention, with old rules and weapon standards, the U.S. Navy could send ships with guns of less than 8 inches in caliber, while the path for submarines and aircraft carriers was closed. While the U.S. Navy operates in all other parts of the world, the presence of the U.S. Navy in the Black Sea is limited by these rules. Despite the theoretical cancellation of the old convention, Turkey refuses to sign a new one, as this would require handing over virtually the entire Aegean Sea to Greece, Turkey's historical rival. The interests of the United States of America and Turkey are directed towards bypassing both the new and old conventions. In theory, Turkey can build an artificial canal next to the Bosporus, as the restrictions only apply to the strait itself. This could allow them to bypass the restrictions and create a kind of island out of Istanbul. The plan to build the Istanbul Canal started in March of 2021. According to the plan, the canal should stretch north from the Bosporus on the European side of Turkey, and its length will be 45 kilometers. If the Turks decide to see it through, the NATO fleet will enter the Black Sea for the first time. And then all attention will be drawn to this place on the map. Suez Canal. Let's move to Egypt, specifically to the Suez Canal, which connects the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. The canal zone is considered a conditional border between 2 continents, Africa and Eurasia. The length of the Suez Canal is 191 kilometers. If you go around, the journey will be 8,000 kilometers. The first projects of a similar canal date back to the 2nd millennium BC. The canal, put into operation in 1869, is partly a reconstruction of ancient Egyptian waterways from the Nile to the Red Sea. The Suez Canal, over a century and a half of operation, has had a significant impact, largely due to the passage of oil barges on the economy of the region and, indeed, the world. During the First and Second World Wars, shipping through the canal was effectively regulated by Great Britain, and it is generally believed that the Suez Canal was the jewel of the British Empire and the main British military strategic base in the Middle East. Only in 1956, the President of Egypt, Gamal Abdel Nasser, nationalized the canal. This led to the invasion of British, French, and Israeli forces and the beginning of the week-long Suez War. As a result, Israel attacked Egypt, and Britain and France vetoed UN demands to end the conflict, allowing the events of the Suez Crisis to further unfold. During the events of the week-long war, the Egyptian armed forces suffered a series of devastating blows, but the international community sharply criticized the actions of the aggressor countries. Interestingly, both representatives of the Soviet Union, which was an ally of Egypt, and the United States of America intervened. The Americans threatened with sanctions and not so simple, and the cancellation of financial aid which America provided to the countries affected after the Second World War. And in the Union, they hinted at the use of nuclear weapons, which, as it turned out later, was a bluff, as there were no capabilities for a nuclear strike yet. Nevertheless, the theoretical nuclear and economic threat became sufficient. The English, the French, and the Israelis renounced their claims, and the most important shipping canal passed into the hands of Egypt. At present, the Suez Canal is one of the key hydraulic structures for the global economy. Every year it brings Egypt $8 billion. In the 22nd year, the canal brought Egypt almost $8 billion, which is a record amount. It accounts for up to 10% of all ships in the world, which makes up about 7% of the total global sea freight. The importance of the canal is hard to overestimate. Just remember what happened in the year 2012. Then the container ship of Evergreen Company, one of the largest in the world with more than 20,000 containers on board, turned inside the canal and blocked it. At that time, more than 400 ships, including large oil tankers, were lined up to pass through the canal. This caused serious economic consequences, as every hour of delay cost global trade $400 million, and Evergreen Company's losses reached tens of billions of dollars. The force majeure situation affected oil prices, freight rates, and prices on many commodity markets. This had a serious impact on the global economy. Just one event in an important place for trade between countries can affect the lives of people in different parts of the world. And since we remembered about the British Empire, it's worth remembering about the La Manche spill, which the British admiral spoke about. La Manche has always been at the center of historical events, as control over it provided great advantages. It was the shortest way both to the Baltic Sea and to the shores of Britain. Sailing through the strait was fraught with many difficulties. The weather here is very changeable. Strong winds often blow, thick fogs descend. In combination with the complex currents and high tides, overcoming this waterway has always been a difficult task. But the trade and political significance of the strait outweighed all the difficulties. During World War II, the strait became a battleground several times. By the end of the war, La Manche played a key role in the unification of Great Britain and continental Europe. A huge flow of goods was transported with the help of steamers. And later, the underwater Eurotunnel was built. Now, the road from the continent to the island takes 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the train moves underwater for about half an hour. In our days, the strait still plays a huge role in the lives of those who visit its shores and the island's people, but it doesn't pull the key point on the map. Malacca Strait. It is also called the Oceanic Highway of Asia. It is located between the Malay Peninsula and the Indonesian island of Sumatra. The strait's length is 582 miles. In strategic and economic terms, it is one of the most important sea routes in the world. It connects the Indian Ocean with the Pacific, providing a link between the three most populous countries in the world: India, Indonesia, and China. Each year, about 50,000 ships pass through the strait, servicing between 1/5 and 1/4 of all sea freight. Of course, Singapore's fantastic wealth and development is not only due to the genius of Lee Kuan Yew, whom we discussed in one of our episodes, but also due to its fortunate location near the Strait of Malacca. Due to its advantageous location, by the end of the 1990s and the beginning of the 2000s, the Malacca Strait probably became the most dangerous place in the world in terms of the threat of piracy. Even after a decade of fighting piracy, isolated cases of ship hijacking still occur. Experts also express concern about potential terrorist actions. If they manage to block a large ship in a narrow place where the depth is only 25 meters, it can cause a complete paralysis of the transport artery and have a colossal destructive effect on world trade. Panama Canal. The Panama engineering structure is called the eighth wonder of the world, and not without reason. It is one of the longest and most complex in the construction of artificial waterways in the world. The Panama Canal connects two oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic. Before it was built, the journey from one point to another took many months. Now, the distance can be covered in 8 to 10 hours. The history of its construction is very long. The first construction began in the 14th century, but it was not successful. The French tried to dig a canal, but the Americans interfered, for whom the path through Panama was of great importance. In 1903, the United States of America separated Panama from Colombia by means of a coup. New people came to the leadership positions of the independent state. They granted America the rights to the perpetual use of lands near the canal. The U.S. Department of Defense joined the construction. And in the year 1914, American President Thomas Woodrow Wilson, with the help of a telegraph button, made the last symbolic explosion of rock straight from Washington. The event was ceremonial in nature and was held in the presence of government members. Over the years of the Panama Canal construction, more than 25,000 workers died. Complex landscapes and climate served as the cause of mass outbreaks of tropical diseases. In the year 1977, U.S. President Jimmy Carter drafted an act on the transfer of the canal to the ownership of Panama. The document stipulated that the Republic would assume ownership rights in 22 years. And so it happened. Today, Panama is called the Dubai of Latin America. Since the year 2008, the country's economy has been growing at an average of 8% per year, and the toll for ships passing through the canal brings in about $1 billion to the Treasury annually. The biggest threat to Panama is the project of a new canal in Nicaragua. And not just for Panama. Nicaragua is literally the backyard of the United States. Despite the fact that the United States of America and Nicaragua successfully trade with each other, cooperate in the field of combating organized crime and tourism, the relations between these two countries are extremely tense. Now, an even more important role of the backyard, only for China, is played by Taiwan, where the interests of the United States of America and the Celestial Empire collide. Microchip production is the most important industry, without which any complex equipment, including military, can be thrown away as useless junk. We have a separate issue about this complex topic. Shipping through the Nicaraguan Canal will unload and shorten many sea routes, cheapen cargo transportation, and therefore bring solid profits to all participants in the construction. Through this canal, larger and more cargo-capable ships will be able to pass faster than through the Panama Canal, which will be beneficial for the global economy. And China, with the help of financing the project, will gain control over trade routes from Latin America to Southeast Asia. China is also building a railway that will connect two oceans. If the project is completed, America could suffer serious losses. How it will react and who will control the canal in Nicaragua is still unknown. The Gibraltar Strait is a tiny territory, just 6 whole and 50 square kilometers, including the Rock of Gibraltar and a sandy isthmus connecting it to the Iberian Peninsula. For centuries, Gibraltar has been a source of tension between Spain and Great Britain, hindering their normal relations. The Rock of Gibraltar, towering over the surrounding area, is one of the known ancient Herculean pillars located on the European side of the strait. On the opposite side of the strait on the African continent, Mount Ako, or Monkey Mountain, is considered to be the counterpart to the pillars. The ancients considered the Herculean pillars to be the end of the world, beyond which only the unknown existed. The catastrophic lack of space led to the creation of the unique North Front Airport in Gibraltar, the only one in the world where the runway intersects the city's busiest highway. Although Gibraltar belongs to Great Britain, it operates under its own constitution, which was adopted by referendum in 2006. Legislative and executive power formally belongs to the King of Great Britain, but in practice the country is granted the right to internal self-government. Gibraltar is governed by a governor and a parliament of 18 members, elected by the population every 4 years. There is also a ceremonial position of the Mayor of Gibraltar. The entire history of relations between England and Spain is also the history of the exacerbation of the situation around Gibraltar. Periods of calm, when several thousand people crossed the border daily for work and business, were replaced by Spanish blockades with the closure of the crossing. Gibraltar is the last colony of Great Britain in Europe, but not in the world. There are still Bermuda, Montserrat, Anguilla, South Sandwich Islands, Falkland Islands, and Turks and Caicos, British Virgin and Cayman Islands, St. Helena Island and Pitcairn, Akrotiri, Dekilia, and even though they are called British Overseas Territories today, the meaning hasn't changed. Now, considering Brexit, the situation with Gibraltar is constantly changing, and how each side can use it, no one knows. But it is well known that the public opinion in Gibraltar is in favor of staying in the EU with its trade privileges, free movement with Schengen. Here's what's interesting. It is known that the width of the Strait of Gibraltar at its narrowest point is only 14 kilometers. The Eurotunnel under La Manche and the bridge over the Pearl River in China are built on a much larger stretch of open water. Why has no one built a Gibraltar bridge yet? In fact, engineers have been planning to build such a bridge since the 1800 Thais 30s. However, neither then nor today does the scientific and technical level allow for such construction. The depth of the Gibraltar Strait varies from 900 to 3/4 of a mile. For comparison, the depth of La Manche is 174. At such a depth, it is technically difficult to lay a tunnel or set up supports for a bridge. This problem is exacerbated by local currents. One of them is strongly directed from the Mediterranean Sea to the Atlantic. The other, flowing at depth, goes in the opposite direction. Thus, the Mediterranean Sea breathes, exchanging waters. Considering the narrowness of the strait, both currents are quite powerful, and working underwater in such conditions is physically impossible. Critical points for global oil transit. The U.S. Energy Information Agency, in its report, pointed out the most important places for global oil transit. Production of about 61% of the world's oil and other energy carriers was transported along these routes. In addition to the already mentioned pipelines and canals, there are pipelines connecting the ports of the Baltic Sea with the ports of the world ocean. There is the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, through which the path from Europe to East and South Asia, as well as Australia, and the much more influential on the world economy, the Strait of Hormuz. Narrow and strategically important, it connects the Persian Gulf in the southwest with the Gulf of Oman in the southeast, and further with the open ocean. The northern shore belongs to Iran, and the southern to the United Arab Emirates and the Enclave of Oman. About a third of the world's liquefied natural gas and almost 15% of the world's oil consumption pass through this strait, making it a key point for international trade. Strategic enterprises and resources. In the previous decade, the WikiLeaks site published a list of infrastructure objects strategically important for the national security of the United States of America in other countries, compiled by a working group. U.S. Department of State. The importance of the document is indicated by the label's secret, and not for Internet distribution. Foreign strategic infrastructure objects are defined as objects located outside the territory of the United States, the destruction of which, for example, by terrorists, can cause significant direct damage to the economy, population, and internal security of the country. The list includes objects of three categories. First, directly related and capable of directly affecting the territory of the United States of America are gas pipelines, trunk fiber optic cables, and border chemical plants, plots, etc. Second, unique or hard-to-replace resources and products of foreign countries, unique location, chemical, biochemical, and industrial production, infrastructure nodes, and communications. Third, strategic supply routes, canals, pipelines, ports. In the United States of America, such objects are subject to primary protection. But how they are supposed to protect them abroad is not mentioned in the document. The document notes the NATOM hub of trunk gas pipelines, the most important in the world, in the list of Russian objects. Oil terminals in Primorsk, the Baltic pipeline system, and in Novorossiysk, the location and complex for the production of uranium, as well as nickel, gold, and palladium, are likely in Norilsk. The profiles of other former Soviet Union countries resemble Russia's. These are the Druzhba pipelines in Belarus, Baku, Tbilisi, Ceyhan in Georgia, the country's only and strategic object, and in Azerbaijan, terminals and strategic manganese deposits in Ukraine and polymetal in Kazakhstan. Perhaps, at this moment, one can say that one of the most important places on Earth, in case something goes wrong, is the repository of the Doomsday. about which we told in one of our videos. In the underground walls of this structure are the seeds of all known agricultural plants in the world. Write in the comments, what important points on the world map would you add to this list? Subtitles were created